We're going to look at using proofs, our skills from Unit 2, with this new knowledge about transversals and the angles they make. I'm going to direct you first to Google Classroom to your notes here. You're looking for these Unit 3 notes. They're going to come in handy while we're talking today, and really while you do your work and the tests you're going to take, all of it. You should definitely be using these tools. Here, we have these postulates about the angles we've learned about. Basically just says that these types of angles are either congruent or supplementary. Today we're going to be looking at these converse statements of the postulates. All converse means is the reverse. So if I'm going to look at the converse of something, I'm going to say, well, if I have corresponding angles, if those angles are congruent, then that means my lines are parallel. Whereas my original statement, the corresponding angles postulate, tells me that if my lines are parallel, then my corresponding angles are going to be congruent. So they go kind of back and forth. Let's go ahead and look at an example. Here we're asked to prove that these lines are parallel, okay? So we're given that the alternate interior angles 4 and 5 are congruent. We're asked to prove that the lines are parallel. The first thing we're going to do is record our given, like all of our proofs. Then the next move we're going to make is to explain that that angle 1 we're given is congruent to angle 4 using the vertical angles congruence theorem. In other words, because they're vertical angles, they are congruent. Remember, you can look in your notes. If you scroll down to the third page, we have the vertical angles theorem. Okay, that just reminds you that, hey, when you're working with vertical angles, they're congruent. So, done and done there. We're now going to say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. And to do that, we're going to use the transitive property of congruence. Remember, the transitive property is when I want to move things around. So I was given that angle 4 and 5 are congruent. Now I'm saying that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. I've just kind of hopscotched around. But notice that angle 1 and angle 5 are also corresponding angles. So because I proved by another method that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, I can then say that lines G and H are congruent because those happen to be corresponding angles. So that I kind of went backwards from how we've been doing it the past couple days. Now we're going to look at another example. This is using what's called the transitive property of parallel lines. We're going to use it to figure out that all of these numbered streets, so all of these 20th, 19th, 18th Avenue, are parallel to one another. Okay? So our first statement we're trying to work with is that 20th Avenue and 19th Avenue are parallel. If we look at the angles we're given, we know that those are corresponding angles. So because they're marked parallel, we can say, hey, by the converse, if these are corresponding angles, then those lines have to be parallel. Next, we're going to look at 20th here and 18th here. So we need to look at the angles we're given on each of those streets. I can see that those are alternate exterior angles. They're on the opposite side of the transversal here. They're outside of a set of lines. I want to prove that those lines are parallel. So I'm going to say, hey, if my alternate exterior angles are marked congruent, then those lines have to be parallel. That's the converse. So next we're going to look at 18th and 17th Avenue. These two streets here and these two angles are marked congruent again. But what I want to do is just quickly zoom in to these streets to show you that even though this picture might look different from what you've seen, if you zoom in, it should look pretty familiar. I can see that these are alternate interior angles. They're inside of my parallel lines here. They're on the opposite side of that transversal. So these are angles that I've been working with. They're in my notes. And so I know, hey, those are alternate interior. They're already marked congruent for me. I know they're congruent because I've been working with them. And so I'm going to use that converse. These angles are congruent. That means the lines must be parallel. The last thing we're going to do is use the transitive property. And what we're trying to explain is that, hey, all of these lines are parallel to one another. And so remember, the transitive property lets you move stuff around, okay? And so I'm essentially saying if 20th Avenue is parallel to 18th Avenue, then it must be also parallel to 17th Avenue, because I just took the time to say that each of these lines are parallel to one another. So again, that's the transitive property of parallel lines that allows me to say, hey, if one line is parallel to the next and to the next and to the next, then they all are parallel.